In 1920, as suspicions around his investment scheme began to surface, something strange happened. Instead of retreating, Ponzi became more animated, more visible, more amused. He laughed openly about how easily people trusted him. Journalists came looking for cracks, investigators circled, yet Ponzi continued to smile, to charm, to reassure. And most disturbingly, his victims began defending him for free. Crowds gathered outside his office, not to protest, but to protect him. Ordinary people argued with reporters on his behalf, insisting that Ponzi was honest, misunderstood, even benevolent, and Ponzi enjoyed it. Not just the money, the moment. The knowledge that he could stand in plain sight, surrounded by doubt, and still be believed. That people would fight one another to preserve the lie he had given them. That reality itself could be bent, temporarily, by confidence and performance. This is where the Dupers delight reveals its most dangerous form. Because Ponzi didn't stop lying when escape was still possible. He didn't cut and run when warning signs appeared. He escalated, he performed, he lingered, as though the pleasure of being believed outweighed the instinct for self-preservation. Psychologically, this matters. At this point, deception is no longer a tool, it's a reward. The delight overrides caution. The liar begins to savor the asymmetry. I know the truth, you don't, and you're smiling at me. Ponzi's downfall wasn't caused by greed alone. It was caused by the intoxicating pleasure of successful deception. The grin that says, look how easily reality bent. Deepest delight doesn't just give liars away. Sometimes, it keeps them talking long after silence would have saved them. There is a moment, often brief and easily dismissed, when a lie betrays itself, not through contradiction, but through pleasure. A smile that arrives too early, a warmth in the voice where gravity should leave. Psychology calls this deepest delight, the subtle enjoyment some people experience when they successfully deceive another. But what matters isn't the term. What matters is what it reveals, that for certain individuals, deception is not merely a means to an end. It is an emotionally rewarding act, and when lying becomes pleasurable, truth ceases to be a constraint. It becomes an obstacle. Most of us are taught to think of lying as a defensive behavior, something done to avoid punishment, to escape embarrassment, to protect oneself from loss, and for many people, that is largely true. Lying feels uncomfortable, stressful, even shameful. It takes effort and it leaves residue. The body resists it, the conscience protests, and so we assume, quietly, instinctively, that this discomfort is universal. It isn't. For some individuals, deception produces the opposite effect. It brings a sense of calm, of control, sometimes even of joy. The act of being believed becomes rewarding in itself, not because the outcome is secured, but because another person's perception has been successfully occupied. Reality has been redirected, and for a moment, the deceiver stands above it, watching, in control. This is not always obvious. Dupers delight rarely looks like gloating. More often, it appears as a micro-expression, a softened face, a relaxed posture, a flicker of warmth that doesn't belong to the situation at hand. It is the pleasure of asymmetry, the knowledge that one person in the room knows the truth and another does not. And that knowledge creates a quiet sense of superiority. What makes this phenomenon unsettling is not merely that it exists, but that it contradicts a comforting assumption that deception carries an internal cost, that the liar pays something, somewhere, even if no one else notices. Dupers delight challenges this belief. It suggests that, for some, deception is self-reinforcing, that the lie does not erode the psyche, but feeds it. And once that line is crossed, once lying becomes emotionally rewarding, the usual safeguards fail, appeals to conscience lose their force, exposure becomes a gain rather than a threat, and truth itself is no longer something to align with, but something to manage. Throughout history and across cultures, people have noticed this, long before psychology named it. Stories warned us about the smiling trickster, the charming fraud, the liar who seems a little too comfortable in moments that should provoke fear or remorse. These stories were not simply moral lessons, they were observations. In this essay, we will look at what Dupers delight is, how it reveals itself and why it matters, not just in criminals or con artists, but in everyday relationships, institutions and systems of power. Because the most dangerous lies are not always the ones told in desperation, they are the ones told with pleasure.
not be forgotten by the survivors.
But the thing that really haunts me the most is not even the sight and the sound. I mean, the sound and the smell are fading. But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
From a scientific perspective, Dupers' delight sits at the intersection of emotion, cognition, and reward. Research in psychology suggests that deception can activate the brain's reward circuitry in much the same way as winning a game or gaining social approval. When a lie succeeds, when it is accepted, unchallenged, or even defended, the deceiver may experience a small surge of positive effect. This is not metaphorical. Neuroimaging studies link successful deception to activity in regions associated with pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. In other words, being believed can feel good in a very literal biological sense. Importantly, this response is not uniform across people. For many, lying triggers stress responses, increased cognitive load, heightened self-monitoring, and physiological arousal associated with anxiety. But in individuals with certain personality traits, particularly elevated narcissism, Machiavellianism, or psychopathic tendencies, these stress responses are diminished or absent. Instead of tension, there is ease. Instead of fear, curiosity. The lie becomes a performance rather than a risk, and performance, when rewarded, is learned. Over time, this learning matters. Behavior that produces reward tend to repeat, and deception is no exception. Each successful lie strengthens the association between dishonesty and positive emotion, lowering internal resistance to future deception. This is why some people do not merely lie when necessary, but begin to lie habitually, even gratuitously. The pleasure is no longer tied to the outcome, it is tied to the act itself. At this stage, deception stops serving a goal and starts serving the self. What makes Dupers' delight particularly difficult to detect is that it often coexists with composure, relaxed demeanor, a steady voice. Even apparent sincerity can all be side effects of reduced internal conflict. Observers are taught to associate calmness with truth and anxiety with guilt, but in this case, the signals invert. The person who feels nothing has the easiest time appearing convincing, and so the cues we rely on to detect dishonesty become unreliable. Understanding Dupers' delight, then, is not about learning to spot a smile. It is about recognizing that deception is sometimes reinforced rather than punished by the mind itself. And when biology rewards manipulation, moral appeals alone are rarely enough to stop it. Intimate relationships. In intimate relationships, Dupers' delight often hides behind familiarity. An abusive partner may lie, not simply to avoid consequences, but to test the boundaries of another person's trust. When the lie is believed, when concern is met with reassurance or confrontation, with comfort, it produces a subtle reward. The abuser learns that reality can be negotiated, that another person's emotional landscape is malleable. Over time, deception becomes paired with closeness itself. The smile after a denial, the sudden tenderness following a false explanation are not attempts to repair the bond. They are signals of relief and control, and because love biases perception, these moments are rarely recognized for what they are, the pleasure of getting away with it. In cults and high-control religious environments, this mechanism scales rapidly. Here, deception is no longer a private act but a public performance, rewarded continuously by affirmation and devotion. Leaders who claim special insight or divine authority receive constant feedback that their words shape belief. Each prophecy reinterpreted, each doubt reframed as weakness, reinforces the lie emotionally. The leader does not need to suppress guilt if none is felt. Instead, the delight comes from watching others internalize the narrative, defend it, and police one another on its behalf. At this point, deception becomes self-sustaining. The community itself provides the reward, and truth becomes whatever preserves cohesion and authority. In politics, Dupers' delight is often mistaken for confidence. When power insulates deception from consequence, the psychological reward structure becomes especially dangerous. A false statement that is repeated without penalty, applauded, defended, or normalized, teaches the speakers that reality is pliable at scale. The ease with which contradictions are dismissed is not always strategic. Sometimes it reflects a deeper shift, the absence of internal resistance. The smile during denial, the casual tone in the face of evidence are smiles that deception has ceased to feel risky. And when governing becomes indistinguishable from performance, the pleasure of being believed can quietly eclipse the responsibility to be truthful. If there is a practical takeaway here, it is not a checklist, and it is not a call to vigilance in every interaction. Suspicion, when overused, corrodes trust, just as surely as deception does, but awareness operates differently. It asks less of us, and it judges less quickly. One useful shift is to pay attention not to whether someone lies, but to how deception appears to affect them. Discomfort, hesitation, and restraint are common when a person's values are in conflict with their behavior. Ease, warmth, or amusement in moments that should carry weight tells a different story. These signals do not prove intent, and they should not be treated as evidence. They are invitations to slow down, to resist immediate reassurance, to allow ambiguity to exist a little longer than is comfortable. Another consideration is pattern, rather than incident. Dupers delight rarely announces itself in a single moment. It accumulates across repeated denials, repeated reframings, repeated assurances that resolve confusion without resolving facts. When pleasure seems to accompany contradiction, when confidence grows in proportion to doubt, it may be worth noticing who benefits from the confusion and who is asked to adapt to it. Finally, it helps to remember that deception does not require malice to be harmful. Some people lie because they fear loss, others because they enjoy control, still others because the internal cost is simply absent. The effect, however, is often the same, a gradual erosion of shared reality. Recognizing this is not about assigning blame, it is about protecting one's relationship to truth, especially in environments where certainty is offered too easily and discomfort is quietly discouraged. Across abusive relationships, cults, and political systems, the pattern is the same because the mechanism is the same. Dupers' delight is not defined by the scale of the lie, but by the emotional reward attached to it. Whether the audience is one person, a congregation, or a nation, the pleasure comes from the same source, being believed, while knowing the belief is false. When deception is met with trust, loyalty, or applause, it stops being a temporary strategy and becomes a stable psychological incentive. And at that point, the danger is no longer the individual lie, but the environment that rewards it. Because wherever Dupers' delight goes unchallenged, truth does not simply disappear, it becomes negotiable. Dupers' delight is a subtle and unsettling aspect of human behavior, a quiet pleasure that arises when deception succeeds. It is not merely about lies or their consequences, but about the emotional reward the liar experiences, the relief, the warmth, the confidence, even the fleeting joy of knowing that another person believes what is untrue. Science shows that this response is rooted in our brain's reward systems and that it manifests differently across individuals, depending on personality traits and emotional wiring. History and folklore reveal its persistence across time and culture, from Charles Ponzi reveling in the trust of his victims, to trickster figures in myth, to modern leaders manipulating perception on a national scale. Whether in abusive relationships, cults, or political arenas, Dupers' delight transforms deception from a tool into a habit, from a strategy into an experience to be savored. Recognizing it is not a matter of suspicion, but an observation, noticing the ease, the pleasure, the confidence that accompanies untruth, and in that recognition lies both a warning and a lens through which to understand the fragile, negotiable nature of belief itself.